Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and then if others come in, we can always catch them up. I think we have a pretty small group tonight. We're also holding a concurrent in-person session in Taunton, so I'm not quite sure how many people are over there versus online, so we can kind of be a little bit more casual about things. But I'm gonna just want to welcome everyone and give a brief introduction about kind of the Assawompset Ponds Management Plan project in general. Tonight's particular topic is about water quality and what we can do to improve water quality in both the Damascus River and the entire APC system, which includes Long Pond, Assawompset Pond, the Cobenefits ponds, and Watershed Pond. I'm just gonna admitting other people as they come in here. I'd like to just kind of start off with a round of introductions with who we have in here so far. So I'll start. I'm Helen Zinkavage. I'm the manager of environmental programs at SRPEDD, which is the RPA for Southeastern Massachusetts. I'm here in our office.
Okay.
So I'm just going to call on people, so it's a little early, but
yeah, I'm not Diane Healy. I'm Jack Healy.
All right, Jack.
I was the town manager in Middleborough for 22 years, and I'm currently serving on the planning board, the zoning board, the gas and electric commission, and the community preservation committee.
Awesome. So full plate, yeah. How about Bren? Can you unmute yourself? I'm not sure.
I'm Bren Ladino. I'm an officer of the Long Pond Association, and we are in the process of becoming a nonprofit and are just at the very beginning.
Awesome. How about Martha?
Hi, I'm is my audio on? Just checking.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I'm also an officer of the newly nonprofit Long Pond Association. I have waterfront property between First and Second Island on Long Pond, been living there since 1986. So I'm very interested in what's happening on the pond.
Gotcha. Thank you. Trying to see who else. Pete DeFusco.
Hey, I'm Pete DeFusco. I'm a senior environmental specialist, and I think my Zoom name says Eversource, but I'm just here volunteering. I grew up in Freetown, and I have a very big connection to the Little Kiss Pond and its watershed, and a lot of knowledge and history of the area. So I'm just happy to help. Looking forward to this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for being here tonight. I think the next round of introductions I'll do is Mayor is kind of like town staff and legislative delegation. So Mayor Lee, are you there? I believe that's Mayor Lee Kelly from, she's a conservation agent in Rochester, but she might just be offline for a second here. How about Josh Newhall?
Hey folks, my name's Josh. I recognize most of you by now. I'm from Representative Norman Orrall's office. We oversee Berkeley, Taunton, Lakeville, and sections of Middleborough. So a pretty big portion of the APC falls in our territory. I also, up until 2 months ago, was a Lakeville resident myself. Now I live in Taunton, so still technically part of the APC area. So here on 2 accounts.
And how about Skylar Kelly?
Hello, everyone. My name is Skylar. I'm from State Rep Paul Schmidt's office. I'm the Community Affairs and Constituent Services Coordinator for the representative. And as Josh, so wonderfully pointed out, I handle the constituent and community affairs for the Long Pond District, as we have the East Freetown side of the pond. And the other big thing that he wanted to stress is he wanted to say hello to everyone. He is currently in his farm right now, and he can't make it into the meeting. However, he did say he wanted me to say if anybody has any questions or has anything they want to bring up to him now during the meeting or after, to please let me know. And if you need my information, I'll be more than happy to supply it.
Thanks, Skylar. we got a message from Mary Lee in the chat. I think she's having some microphone issues, that she says that she's Mary Lee Kelly, conservation agent for Rochester. She's here with us, just just working on her microphone at the moment. And then finally, we have kind of the consultant project team, the people who are going to be giving a presentation tonight and kind of doing the meeting facilitation. So Ben, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Also, I think we have Michael, Michelle. Sorry. Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a comprehensive planner here at SRPEDD, and I've been working on this project team along with Helen and Eric, and it's been a fantastic opportunity just to learn a lot more and have the opportunity to work on the plan. And I'm excited to hear all of your feedback tonight.
And how about you, Eric?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Eric Walberg. I'm an independent consultant working on the project, and I'll be walking you through the water quality slides this evening. So thank you for coming.
I think Senator Rogers might have snuck in here at some point, but I don't know, maybe my screen's just.
Sorry, that was me. I realized
Okay.
I'm logged into his account, so it popped up as him, so I apologize. But I'm here on behalf of the senator who is in Portugal at the moment, but he sends his best to everyone. And as always, feel free to reach out if we can be of any assistance. Sorry for the confusion.
No, sorry. All right, I'm going to start sharing my screen. So this is the second meeting we're having in this series devoted to the Assawompset Ponds Complex. And we're kind of once a month having a topical meeting, reflecting the content that'll be in the management plan when all is kind of said and done, and the various kind of interests that we're trying to balance and think through as we put this management plan together. So the first meeting was on floodwater management, and now tonight is about water quality. So we have a slightly, if you guys were at the first presentation, that we tried to shorten the first part, the overview part, it might be a little repetitive, but just for the sake of the recording, I think we'll breeze through it kind of quickly here. Let me share. All right, so this is kind of what I just summarized, public meeting number 2 on water quality, and this is on an effort toward creating an Assawompset Pond Complex and a Damascus River Watershed Management and Climate Action Plan. Our agenda for tonight is to kind of just go over the project, consider some potential recommendations for improving water quality. We have some data to present about some of the sources of different water quality impairments around the system. So we'll kind of give a baseline of information related to that, as that kind of will lead us into our conversation about potential management actions and some of your feedback to what we're suggesting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben to kind of walk us through the general project overview. And Ben, just let me, if I'm slow on the slides, just let me know. I'll advance them.
You got it. Thanks, Helen. So at the heart and soul of the management plan is a collaborative effort across a variety and number of stakeholders. As you can see, like our project team right now, and has a great kind of diversity of experience. And this also encompasses a lot of the member communities. So we have, as part of the management team, the City of New Bedford and the City of Taunton. We're fortunate to have their water divisions part of the management team, and part of kind of gathering the information that we need and developing some of these processes that we'll discuss, and suggested management actions that we'll discuss later on in the presentation. We're also fortunate to have the herring fishery commissions and so many other Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, and of course local board and commission members who are all participating in the project. Also like to note the town staff. Merely, it's awesome that you're here tonight, and thank you to everyone who's supported the project so far. Yeah, so we had a brief round of introductions. This is the rest of the project team who's kind of directly involved. As you can see, we have members from SRPEDD, from Horsley Witten, Walberg Consulting, and the Nature Conservancy, as well as the MVP program run by the state. So it's really is a very diverse team with a lot of experience and background. So just some quick facts about the watershed. I'm sure you all know a lot about this already, but the watershed encompasses just around 70 square miles of territory over the towns of Freetown, Lakeville, Middleborough, Rochester, and a small portion of New Bedford, and serves as a drinking water supply for the city of Taunton. So there really are all these interconnectivities between the towns and between the ecological and developmental dimensions of the watershed, which is why this plan is very exciting. It takes that whole watershed approach. Yeah, so as I mentioned, some of the major stakeholders are a lot of these pondside and riverside communities and residents. New Bedford and Taunton supply 250,000 people, and there are also all the Middleborough Lakeville Herring Commission and the Wild and Scenic Taunton River Stewardship Committee, who demonstrate some of the ecological dimensions of this management plan and some of the work that we're doing. And also, of course, recreational interests, as the Ponds Complex in the Damascus River is a regional recreational asset, and major landowners in the inner region. Helen, would you be able to? Awesome. So this management plan builds upon years, kind of decades even, of previous studies that have looked at individual aspects of the watershed of the rivers, everything from the ecology to the impairment status of certain rivers and water bodies. And this management plan is a little unique in that it's developing comprehensive goals for the entire watershed system. So kind of taking all of these individual studies and individual approaches and perspectives and bringing it under a big tent that we can use to better understand intersections between different topic areas and different issues, and really create more robust management actions going forward. This plan is also is looking at addressing existing issues, but it's also taking a future-looking approach, looking forward to 2050, in order to take into account some of the changes that we might see because of climate change, particularly temperature and precipitation, and how these might influence some of the dimensions that we're discussing. And this plan is also unique because it really is not only looking at how these dimensions again can interact, but where there might be space for additional co-benefits, such as recreation and recreation and protecting certain ecologies. There are some interesting co-benefits, and also if you're thinking of land conservation and floodwater control or water quality, as we're going to discuss tonight. So that's where the plan is great in terms of teasing out and looking at some of these unexpected relationships. So just to quantify some of what we might expect to see by looking out at 2050, is that we can expect to see an additional between 15 and 33 additional days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So really seeing an increase in the number of heat waves or extreme heat days, which of course can have impacts on everything from water supply to the health of vulnerable populations, to people maybe even not wanting to get out and recreate as much because it's so hot out. In terms of precipitation, we're going to see annually an additional 2.5 inches of precipitation, which when combined with this next point of the 2 additional days of extreme weather per year, paint a picture of more precipitation happening in a shorter number of extreme events. or a greater number of extreme events. So similar to the to some of the heavier rainfalls that we experienced over the last summer in particular, is what we can expect to see going into the future. And of course, similar to the first point of additional days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to see that those days more grouped together. So we're going to have an additional day and a half of consecutive dry days, which similar to this last summer and the past couple of years relates to heat waves and drought conditions, and is something that we're hoping to address in this management plan. And the other dimension, of course, that can't be left out of all of this is the human dimension and the impact that development and economic activity will have on water quality and water supply and ecology within a region. So part of the management plan is also developing what we call a build-out analysis to see where development potentially can happen and then where it's likely to happen. And so this forms the foundation of, again, addressing some of those potential management actions and really getting targeted in some of the recommendations that we can have. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Eric. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. Ben's sort of provided us with a good overview of the structure of the plan and what we're about. So I'd like to start my section with just sort of a restatement of vision for the watershed. And this was something that's come through our work with the stakeholders in the region. And no surprise to anybody in the meeting tonight, but what we're really looking at is sort of a multiple benefits approach, where we're looking for a healthy community for the residents of the watershed, healthy from an ecological perspective, maintaining the viability of the water supply, and resilience to climate change, as Ben has started to reference. So I think that this statement does a pretty good job of outlining all of those points. So next slide, please. Okay, so the issues we're going to talk through tonight, and this, really, I think, sort of tees up sort of the process that we're going through in assembling the plan. So we've done a lot of work to inventory impacts that have been observed. For those of you who were in on the flooding meeting last month, we had a map with a compendium of those issues. Likewise, we're going to look at a similar set of maps on water quality issues tonight. We're going to talk in some detail about projected climate impacts, and certainly that's going to be an important piece of the puzzle on water quality issues. We're going to talk a little bit about the co-benefits of taking action, particularly to address non-point source water pollution. And then I'm going to pass it over to Helen, and she's going to walk us through a participatory portion of the program tonight, where we'll discuss potential management actions. Next slide, please. Can you go forward one, please? Yep, there we go. Okay. All right. So first of our water quality slides. And I'd like to start off by using a couple of definitions and differentiating between what's known as point source water pollution and non-point source. And apologies, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this terminology. But when I say point source in this presentation tonight, I'm talking about water pollution from wastewater treatment plants, some industrial facilities. Basically, it's end of pipe inputs into the watershed. But we're also going to talk about non-point source pollution, and that's a much more diffuse input in terms of water pollution, and in general is the result of rainfall and snowfall moving across the watershed and into the receiving water bodies. And one of the points I'd like to make as we walk into this is that, due to upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant on the Assawompset pond on the Damascus River that took place back in 2017. A lot of what's been done in the vein of treating water pollution issues in this watershed on the point source side has already been taken care of. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some point sources left to be addressed, but most of what we're going to be talking about tonight and most of what we're going to be dealing with in the plan are the non-point source issues. And at this point, roughly 20% of the pollution budget, so to speak, that's outstanding and has to be dealt with is going to have to be taken care of through dealing with those non-point sources. So with that, let me explain this, and we'll spend a little bit of time on each of these slides. There's a lot of information. If you do have questions as I unpack this, please let me know. So the map that we've got over on the right-hand side is a very typical land use map. A dominant land use, as you can see shown in yellow, is residential here. Some of the institutional uses are shown in purple and pink. The green areas are forested and ag lands, and the blue are protected lands. And then moving over to the left-hand side where we've got the pie chart, you can see roughly 60% of the land area in the watershed is still in a natural state, roughly 20% developed, about 6% in ag, and of course the majority of that is in cranberry bogs, and then about 15% wetlands. So, you know, we're fortunate in that there is a lot of natural and protected land in the watershed, but over time, that percentage that's developed is creeping up. And along with that, we get an increase in impervious surface. And so when we get a rainfall event, particularly, you know, very heavy event, it tends to wash pollutants off of those impervious surfaces. And by impervious surface, that includes driveways, rooftops, roadways, et cetera. So a lot of what we're going to be dealing with in the plan is strategies for how we trap those pollutants moving off of those impervious surfaces before they get into the receiving waters. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so there are a number of different assessments of water quality that have taken place over the years. And so this is sort of an amalgam of several different inputs. But as I'm sure you're aware, DEP maintains an impaired waters list. And so this is what some highlights from that impaired waters list look like for the APC and Nemasket watersheds. And you'll see over here on the map on the right, the area in red is aquatic life use not supported. And let me take a step back and explain that most of these assessments are done based on different possible uses of the receiving water. And so, you know, swimming, physical contact, drinking water supply, et cetera. All those, you know, count in terms of the various possible uses. There will be a TMDL developed for the upper portion of the Damascus. That's an assessment of what's called total maximum daily loads. At this point, it's not known what's causing the toxicity issue in this portion of the river. The TMDL process is structured to help make that identification and then develop a strategy for dealing with the problem. You can see in Long Pond, we've also got an impairment that's due to non-native aquatic plants. That's, you know, for those of you who live in the watershed, this is an ongoing issue. It's a situation where we've got an interplay between a number of different factors where you've got invasives combined with a lot of nutrient input. And then climate does play a role with warming temperatures there. So anyway, this, you know, gives us a pretty good overview of where things stand right now in terms of water quality assessment. So next slide, please. Okay, so in thinking about strategies, and we're going to get to that discussion a few slides down the deck here, but we certainly need to think about interactions between a number of different types of factors. And I think this is certainly inherent in the setup that Ben supplied and some of the comments that I've made so far. But, you know, one of the key factors that we need to be concerned with is nutrient loading. with a lot of the residential and business development that's taken place in the watershed, almost all of that is on septic systems. Some of those systems are old, probably not functioning at 100%. And so that's certainly a major factor in nutrient loading. In the past, there's been a lot of issue with nutrient loading for cranberry bogs, certainly over time. That's been dealt with to some extent, but it's still another factor. Erosion and sedimentation. I've got a slide coming up on climate issues, but suffice to say that we're getting a biasing over time, and we're getting fewer, mild and moderate precipitation events, and an increase in the percentage of the precipitation we're getting in really heavy downpours. And so, as you can imagine, that really starts to exacerbate problems with erosion and sediment control. So one of the issues, we're going to have to be really cognizant of is thinking about how we deal with that and planning for future development in the watershed. So I'm not going to go through every factor here, but just, as we talk through various strategies, just kind of keep this image in mind of the need to deal with all of these intersecting stressors. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit more definition here on nutrient loading. And so the two nutrients that we're primarily concerned with here are nitrogen and phosphorus. You can see from the pie chart over on the right that the wastewater treatment facilities account for roughly 40%. But then we start to get into some of the issues with non-point source, and included in that are the septic systems, which are up near 25% of the nutrient loading, stormwater runoff up near 15%, the cranberry bogs at up around 6%. So you can see that because, at this point in the watershed, much of what's been done or can be done to deal with point source has already been taken care of. So it's really those portions of the pie chart that contribute to the non-point source side that are going to have to be dealt with now. I'm looking back over at the left on the slide. You can see a list, and again, I've already started to enumerate these, but in terms of non-point sources of both nitrogen and phosphorus, it includes failing septic systems, stormwater runoff from impervious surface, residential and commercial fertilizer use. We've got a slide coming up on potential management action associated with that. The cranberry bogs and other agricultural operations, and then improperly sited development. Anytime you've got development that directly connects impervious surface to receiving water, you've got the potential for really setting up some problems there. So next slide, please. And this is a concept, again, that I think a lot of you are probably familiar with. But one of the sort of repetitive problems in this watershed is low dissolved oxygen. And this is where, if you think back to the slide that I showed, where the intersecting stressors were represented, that concept really is important here, because we've got many different factors. We've got invasive species, which leads to a tremendous amount of submerged aquatic vegetation in the ponds and in the upper Damascus. We've got temperatures that are warming over time. And so that sets up the eutrophication process that's described in the picture over here on the left. And basically it's a situation where you've got nutrient input, you've got the vegetation, you get vegetation blooms, that vegetation dies and it consumes the oxygen in the system and can lead to fish kills, etc. So, part of what we're about is thinking about how we can interrupt that cycle. So next slide, please. So, at this point, this is going to get a little bit redundant because I've covered a number of these topics. But in thinking about the discussion on solutions tonight, certainly, thinking about water use and water withdrawal is pertinent. Thinking about stormwater management and impervious surface, A lot of work's already been done in this watershed on identifying bridges and culverts that impede flow. That's certainly a real factor in thinking about the flooding issues. It also contributes to some of the water quality issues that we're talking about tonight. Increased water temperatures, loss of streamside and buffers that front the wetland areas, and degradation of the wetlands, again, due to some of these non-point source pollution issues that we're talking about tonight. So next slide, please. All right, and then to kind of wrap up this discussion of different types of point and non-point source pollution, but really emphasizing the non-point source side here. And again, apologies that this is a little bit redundant, but suffice to say that most of the bacterial pollution problems that we've got on the non-point source side are tied to this combination of septic issues and stormwater runoff. Certainly, we've got a little bit of livestock in the watershed. That's not a huge factor here. There are natural sources such as waterfowl, tributary inputs, and the wastewater treatment plant that we've already discussed. We're not going to get into detail on some of the other potential hazards in the watershed, but anytime you've got urbanization, you've got the possibility of fuel, could be heating oil, could be from, automobile accidents, etc. There's a relatively new pollutant of concern known as PFAS, which is, oftentimes a runoff from manufacturing sites, et cetera. At this point, the drinking water utilities are monitoring for PFAS. To my knowledge, they haven't identified any problems, but anyway, it's something that's been in the news. So next slide, please. All right, so climate change impacts. And again, I've already spoken a little bit about this, but basically everything that's happening with a warming climate tends to exacerbate some of the challenges associated with managing non-point source pollution and the eutrophication issues that we're talking about here. So we've got warming temperatures that can lead to increase in drought impacts when we have mild and moderate drought. We're going into a world where on the one hand, we're likely to have too much water during some time periods and too little during others. Extreme storm events, pretty much every locality in this part of the world has been hammered by big coastal winter storms over the last few years that can deal, or cause a lot of downed trees, power outages, etc. But also comes with very heavy precipitation and creates the runoff that we've been speaking about. Higher surface temperatures, again, that can mean that the stormwater moving into the receiving waters is of higher temperature, and increasing annual precipitation. Now, this is something that varies regionally, but for the Northeast region of the US, the annual increment of precipitation that's being received is going up year over year. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, just a few thoughts on co-benefits. A lot of what can be done to deal with non-point source pollution, also, if you're smart about it, can really provide some nice benefits in terms of habitat restoration, floodwater management, et cetera. And, Ben had spoken earlier about the need to look across issues and think about integration. And certainly this is top of mind for us. I know as Helen leads us through the discussion of alternatives, this theme is going to crop up. But there are many opportunities where, if we're smart about additional land conservation, restoring areas, environmental management, et cetera, in many cases, we're able to check a number of different boxes, including improving water quality, doing a better job of dealing with floodwater, et cetera. Next slide, please. All right, so Helen, I'm going to pass it over to you at this point. So thank you.
All right, thank you to Eric and Ben. That was a really great overview, I think. before we launch in, does anyone have any kind of questions about anything that Eric talked about in terms of some of the kind of science or theory behind water quality issues in the watershed?
Helen, just one question. I know Eric mentions that you guys didn't find PFAS around the area so far. I think DEP recently announced that the East Grove Street area of Middleborough, which is pretty adjacent to this area, recently found some PFAS. It wasn't at like extreme levels as far as I could tell. I think it was 20.8 parts per trillion rather than 20 parts per trillion. But I just wanted to see if you guys had heard anything about that, knew if that had made its way into the water supply or anything like that.
Yeah, hey, Helen, Ben, please jump in. My understanding is that the monitoring that the utilities have done so far hadn't turned up a problem at this point. Helen, does that fit with your understanding?
That's my understanding, yeah, that at least on the water supply side, that there wasn't yet any kind of issue that would trigger any kind of potential action, and they're definitely testing for it. Luckily, I mean, you don't want PFAS anywhere, but if that was kind of along the Damascus rather than the ponds, the water is kind of flowing from the ponds into the Damascus, so away from the drinking water supply per se. But yeah, it's never good that it would be leaching anywhere in the watershed. So that's definitely something that we should include in the plan and talk about that area specifically. Yeah.
Terrific. I wasn't sure if it had gone anywhere towards the river itself. We just got an update from DEP last week. And I think as far as I was aware from what they told me, it was only in certain wells in the area, not in any public drinking supply.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, all right, so, and feel free as we go to shout out questions, but so kind of the way we're gonna, I think, run this from here out is we're talking about management actions for water quality improvements that fall into a couple of different categories. So on the one hand, there's physical projects where we can actually kind of make a change on the ground, something like to a structure or something like that, that will help with water quality. And the major kind of categories in the physical projects are to try and pursue projects that, one, would reduce nitrogen and phosphorus, two, that would manage stormwater runoff and sedimentation better and kind of intercept that before it gets to the water. Three, identify and mitigate potential hazard contamination sites and kind of give those extra attention and remediation efforts. Four, manage nuisance vegetation, whether it's through mechanical pulls or some efforts at trying to stem the runoff that carries excess nutrients in the first place. And then lastly, five, enhance water quality and flow to kind of keep water, the problems with the dissolved oxygen, some of the things that happen with more stagnant water. If we address some of the flow, it might help those issues. On the other hand, we have regulatory mechanisms that we can pursue. We're going to be talking about three specific ideas tonight that we wanted you guys feedback on, particularly wetland buffer protections, septic system design and maintenance standards, and then fertilizer use and agricultural best practices. So with that, we're going to kind of just dive into each one of these kind of categories. And I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth between sharing the screen and then kind of having us be able to see each other as we talk, and we'll see how that goes. Give it a shot. So as we kind of discuss these strategies, some questions that you could be kind of thinking through are, have we missed any issues in proposing these strategies? Are we kind of having an effect we're not thinking through? Do you agree with the management strategy identified? Do you simply think it would work or won't work? Is it realistic or does it seem not feasible? So those kind of like practical questions. If there's kind of any level of priority that we should be giving to particular management action, like if that's the number one thing that you think needs to be done to help water quality, please definitely voice that. Have any of these strategies been tried before to your knowledge and been maybe successful or unsuccessful? And what are some of the potential trade-offs we might be thinking about? And then any additional ideas. So first, the first kind of category, and I'll read them through, and I'll give everyone just kind of a minute to look at them again before I take the screen off. But when we talk about specifically reducing those problematic nutrients that cause a lot of water quality issues, the nitrogen and the phosphorus loads that enter the systems, there are a few different recommendations or actions that we could pursue. One is to upgrade septic systems around ponds as appropriate. And this ties to kind of a potential bylaw revision that we can talk through as well, with other towns considering denitrification septic systems for new construction as a potential option. So upgrading those septic systems to stop some of that kind of wastewater leaching and treat the nitrogen levels a little bit more effectively. Another potential solution is to install permeable or reactive barriers that filter nutrients from groundwater throughout certain spots in the watershed. Different towns, or even for residents, explaining kind of the best pest management solutions to limit pesticide and herbicide treatments can help with water quality. We're kind of balancing against that threat of triple E, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts about what you observed and kind of the trade-offs there. Implement best management practices for de-icing of roads, I guess, mostly to avoid excessive salting, which affects water quality. Work with specific kind of industries that might have larger effects than your average just one homeowner, like golf courses that use fertilizer and other things, to kind of have best practices, especially along if they were right on the river. And then finally, identify some candidate sites for repairing. Repairing is just the word for along the river, the land that's along the river, kind of that zone along the banks. So identify some candidates for restoration, particularly for phosphorus control. So I'm just gonna give everyone like 10 seconds or so to digest this list, and then we can kind of talk through it together in terms of what you guys think is good, bad, indifferent for this particular group of strategies. All right, Peter, I think you have your hand raised. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Helen. Actually, if you can keep that list up there, I would love to reference the first one you had there.
Sure. Yeah, I'll toggle back and forth, but if you guys want me to put it back up, just let me know.
Sure. One thing to consider, when you're upgrading septic systems, a lot of time you're putting the cost on private homeowners, which is always a really easy fix from a municipal, state, federal standpoint, because like I said, it's putting the cost on private landowners. So that sucks from a taxpayer point of view. One of the things I am noticing towns doing is they're offering 0% loans for people to upgrade, and that's an incentive that's definitely a lot more beneficial than just having to bear the load of what's pretty costly all at once.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yes, yeah.
Where are the towns getting the money?
I'm not sure if they're drawing it from community preservation. Couldn't tell you. I have not participated in it, as I just have a traditional Title V, and I'm not near any wetland resource areas. But
Yeah, well, it
wetland.
would be helpful to know what all the different communities are doing, if they're doing different things, and communities don't know about some of the options, then maybe sharing that kind of resource might be helpful to them.
Sure. Westport Board of Health, give them a ring. They're doing it for their taxpayers. That's a good starting point.
Nice. Yeah, we have 3 towns in the region that have like a denitrifying requirement for new construction or like major upgrades. And I think Westport might be the most recent, but I didn't know that they were doing that loan. So that's great. We can definitely look into that example. Skylar, did you have a question or comment?
No, I just had a comment to follow up with all of the things that were just said. Representative Schmid, since I came on board with him in 2017, has introduced a bill into the legislature to kind of make it more economically feasible for folks to get replacements or to replace their septic systems when they fail. I just pulled up the info. It's actually House Bill 1009, 1009 for this particular cycle. But to answer some of the questions that were just posed, the way that he has the bill written and the way that it sits right now is that, and this is to my understanding, I'm not the legislative director. If you need more in-depth information, I can be more than happy to connect anyone with her. But to my understanding, what happens is if a person has a failed septic tank, they can go to their local board of health and they will connect them together, and the board of health in the town or municipality will take on some of the burden to kind of subsidize and to kind of push people towards, replacing things that, will not harm the environment, will not infect the water supply and things like that. And you mentioned Westport as an example. Westport has, to my knowledge, something similar to that, because one of the major problems Westport faces is soil erosion and degradation of wetlands that lead out into the Atlantic Ocean through the Westport River, and parts of it are becoming impassable. So this is something that Westport took on to kind of just test the waters, and the representative is trying to push that at the state level to get get it on the books so that it's more available. So that one is currently being pushed as hard as it can, but it's been, like I said, it's been introduced every year since I came on board with varying levels of success, but it is something on the books. I just wanted to make note of that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll definitely look up that bill. Yeah, and we're trying to also, since this is a forward-thinking plan, trying to align with where we're hoping, where the state plans to go with some of its policies and programs. So that's great information. Yeah, I'll put the list up one more time for this one to see if any. Okay, all right.
It's Pete again. I don't know if, are you ready to move on from the septic system topic? Is this a free for all?
Yeah.
Okay. Update management plans. Excuse me. I wanted to address BMPs. Looks like it's the next one for use appropriate materials. So best management practices are essential. I think one of the hardest things is getting a lot of folks to acknowledge that they exist, right? So anybody can operate a chainsaw, weed whacker, a lawnmower, or apply a lot of really nasty chemicals to wherever near really important environmentally sensitive areas. So I guess addressing those would be, there needs to be some sort of foundation in education, and starting with municipal DPWs or highway departments. I mean, even, as I said, with extensive knowledge of Little Quiticus, growing up there, best management practice have not always been employed, creating a lot of soil erosion sediment control to the pond. So I think the point I'm trying to convey is having some sort of foundation of education and expectation that this is being carried out by, the municipal level, and to try and get it to pass along to private landowners as well. I mean, it's
the sense that like the municipality can set the example and then kind of show those techniques.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really holistic, a multifaceted approach to, essentially you need to change culture to get, true green to no longer be cool, and a native vegetated buffer along a water view to be cool. So that's a really, really big task.
All right, I'm gonna move us on to kind of the next grouping here, but this is kind of designed to be like really restrictive. So if something comes up in 5 minutes that you recall, is shout it out. It's no big deal. So some potential actions for managing stormwater runoff and sedimentation. So one option is to install green infrastructure to mitigate flooding on roadways. So this is some strategies that oftentimes will kind of reduce impervious surface areas, revegetate areas that have kind of been disturbed and that have more potential to intercept stormwater if they were in better shape. Basically, if they could be at their best, they'd be able to infiltrate more water, filter polluted runoff. So it's kind of installing quote unquote green infrastructure, like bioswales, or sometimes people refer to it as country drainage even, that can just naturally help mitigate flooding and filter water on its way into the ground. And particularly like targeting roadways and road surfaces, at least like the alongside roadways for that, some of those treatments. Same deal on properties kind of abutting the river, installing green infrastructure along the water's edge to again help with that infiltration and filtering. One way to kind of help with sedimentation is to restore the Damascus River channel to improve flow and kind of prevent buildup of sediment. Another option is to review.
Just if I could comment on that.
Sure, please.
Yeah, the Damascus River channel is challenged all the time. It's been something that the local committee has been working on for years now, and just recently got some of the weeds removed from the river to improve the channel flow. But both in the buildup of sandbars and weed growth are a serious detriment to the river and to the traveling of the fish, the herring up the river and down the river, of course. But that's something that really needs to be addressed in some kind of a financial way, because the local community, Middleborough, has attempted to do that with raising funds and locally and getting it done. But we need a constant source of not only funds, but a program for removing the weeds and the buildup of sandbars all up and down the river throughout Middleborough. And this needs to be a regional effort rather than a local effort, because it's not happening often enough. We don't have enough resources, financial and otherwise, to do it on an ongoing basis. So if we're going to do something on a regional basis, I'd put that up near the top of the list for action items. And this has been an ongoing. I came in as town manager in 1985 through 2007, and about midway in that time frame, we started raising money, working on and developed a committee working on maintaining the Damascus River channels, and we haven't got the job done yet. So it needs to be a regional effort. It needs we need the equipment. We have rented very recently, we have rented equipment and men to come in and do some pulling of the weeds. That's not nearly enough. I mean, it's like a it's just not getting the job done. So that's a serious problem, both for the fish and for the health of the river. And I'd urge everybody to try and move that up on the list of projects that get funded on an ongoing basis from a regional or a statewide source in order to make it work. I mean, it's a serious problem. And if we're concerned at all about the fish, then we need to do the job and do it right. And they need to get up and down the river, obviously. They can't spawn if they don't get there. And then they need to get back to the ocean. So, hey, if that's on your list of things to do, I suggest it gets funded somehow.
Yeah, it definitely is. So I know there's a couple of hands up and I will call on you. Yeah. So a lot of the, it's a couple levels, right? So on the one hand, we need to address the issue that's there now, right? Right now, there's weeds in the river, there's sediment in the river. Like you said, Jack, it's been there for decades at this point. So some of the things we can do on a current basis to try and deal with what's happening is things like what the Hearing Commission did with that was kind of a pilot effort that took some thinking about permitting, right? So
well, I think it's pretty clear that what we need to do is we need to find the resources, financial and otherwise, to buy the equipment and hire the help to use it to maintain the river the way it should be in order for the fish to get in and out.
So it's the equipment, but it's also the permitting that really was like a hurdle for a long time.
Yeah, I was going to agree with that. It wasn't so much a financing thing. It was more of getting the approval from the federal authorities, from what I understood in this last circumstance, right?
Right. So now that we have a precedent for that, we're hoping that that will be easier in the future and that more similar weed pulls can be done. The same thing with removing the sedimentation. So we're kind of considering trying to develop some sort of like a multi-year permit, emergency permit, where the state would be able to go in and perform some limited dredging to clear those bars without having to go through an extensive process with both local Concoms every single time. Right. So we are working on some of those immediate things, but we do also want to consider what can we do just not to have the sediment enter the system like that in the first place. Like, so it's kind of what's the upstream cause? We need to deal with the immediate concern, but what can we do to stop that from kind of happening again and again and again? It's kind of the both levels.
Yeah, well, we need to build in a program for getting it done on a regular basis that we know is funded and is going to take place on an annual basis. I mean, if we don't do that, we're just kidding ourselves. And eventually it's going to interfere with the fishery.
Yes, definitely. Martha, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I would echo that. I think it's an extremely timely suggestion that we buy equipment like a eco harvester. It was very costly for the weed removal for just a small part of what they did. We know that there's a big problem on Long Pond. That big problem will only spread. So if there's going to be a rapid response management program, having our own harvester, I think would be a very cost-effective way to approach it.
Yeah. Thank you. I couldn't agree more. By the way, I'm not Diane. My wife's letting me use her.
I didn't think you were.
Again, I'm Jack Healy, and I've been working on this since 1985. I spent 17 years as town manager in Middleborough, and I've also worked in Freetown and Westport. So I'm on board with all the things you're trying to do. I just need to continue to involve myself to the point, at least of letting you know where some of the problems lie. And the biggest problem with the flow of the Damascus River in this area and getting the fish in and out of the Assawompset Pond complex is the weeds and buildup of things that are making it impossible for them to move freely in and out. So if that's part of what your game plan is here, let's find a real source of permanent funding, long-term, annually, so we know that it's getting done. Otherwise, it's a joke. I mean, eventually, you're not going to see any herring in Assawompset Pond.
Okay, Skylar, did you have a comment? Wait, Skylar, but your hand might be raised from last time. Or Josh, do either of you have?
Hello,
any-
Word.
Yeah.
I do have a comment.
Okay, Jack.
Just in response to that last comment, Jack, that it's kind of going back to the third point on that list, I believe was governance and MOUs. From what it sounded like from my participation in this process so far, is that to get a funding mechanism authorized and to get one long running, you need that cooperation between the towns, and at the state level, we kind of need the report that is being produced right here in order to make any action on it. So it sounds like that's the direction we're heading in. We've identified that the governance issue is not having cooperation between all the partners in the APC is a big aspect of it. But recognizing that the weeds are an issue is only part of it. We need to address the fact that we can't make action on the weeds being in the river without cooperation between everybody. So to echo your point, but just to reiterate that the governance aspect is an important part of this.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah,
And if I'm allowed to just jump in as well, just to echo what Josh is saying about the kind of continued, need for both sides to come. Our team and Rep Schmid, and I'm sure Rep Worrell as well, and Senator Rodericks, we're trying to push for the ARPA funding from the federal government to start the studies in Long Pond for all of the things mentioned, whether they be the invasives versus, the flooding issues and things like that. And it's our belief that once we get the money and get the project started, it would be a lot simpler to kind of come back in, and once everyone comes to the table and we can get that ironed out to say, well, this money was put to this use and this is what it produced. If we can get a permanent funding source for it, if we can continue doing this. It's my impression that the representatives want to get something started, so it's a lot easier to get more in the future. It's just like Josh said, it's getting everything together that might be holding us up.
And to clarify, even though we've realized that there has been a long-running issue with the ponds, identifying that through a formal document that says, here's the scientific study, this is what we recognize are the problems and the actual solutions, having that written down is going to be a tremendous help. Believe it or not, even though all the folks in the area have known this for 50 years plus, this is the right first step from what we can see.
Okay.
Martha, did you put your hand back up?
Did. We do have a promised bathymetric study that was being done by the Freetown Lakeville District Committee people. And there's a historical one from, I think, 2004 that was done. So that should give a great comparison of where we were in 2004 and where we are today as far as the pond goes. I believe that report is due anytime. So I think the studies as far as the weeds go will have been completed and can be part of this report. I hate to see more delays and more money wasted on more studies that will tell us the same thing, that there's a weed problem in the pond. At least that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, and it's not just in the ponds, it's in the river.
Of course it is.
Yeah, I mean, So let's make sure that that's inclusive.
Well, it's in the APC. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah.
You know, and we just don't know how bad it is in other areas. But if it's in the Damascus and it's in Long Pond, it's got to be everywhere else.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna just move us on to our next kind of set of recommendations to maybe consider as a group. These recommendations have to do with water quality effects from hazardous material contamination. So one thing we might consider is increasing the number of water sampling sites to kind of monitor water quality in a more consistent way. Same thing with drinking water sampling protocols, kind of make that information. The water suppliers do provide an annual report, but kind of communicating that on a more regular basis for people could, understand what's being done sampling wise. And then take a look at where there are potential harmful chemical spills or known historical issues on contaminated sites. The thought being that if those exist, you really don't want them migrating during a flood event. If you have a bunch of water washing over them and moving contaminants around, it can be pretty harmful. And then also ensuring proper biosolid disposal. That, of course, is the outcome of wastewater treatment, and making sure that just doesn't get dumped in an inappropriate place. So in terms of just hazardous material contamination, do any of these ring true or kind of important to consider going forward? That's okay. That doesn't have to be a big focus of our conversation tonight, but it is something that we're thinking about. So this kind of goes to what we were talking about very recently, managing invasive plants or algae blooms. We know that this is a water quality issue. The impaired waters list that Eric described earlier, while TMDL isn't necessarily developed for invasive plants, they're still considered impaired for that reason. It's a definite water quality impairment that's called out in those data sets. And so, something that we've talked about a lot in previous meetings is kind of installing a boat washing station, trying to understand whose kind of responsibility it would be to staff that, to man it. Different reports have come through that, people will say on Facebook or things that they like using that station, that boat ramp, because there's no one to make them wash their boat when they come out. So, it's not a great situation to not have the boat washing station. Because we don't want to do all this bunch of work in trying to eradicate invasive species only to have them brought in again and again and again with various, watercrafts.
May I ask one more question?
Sure.
I see that there's controlling invasives, remove invasive vegetation masses in the first 500 feet of the Damascus River in Long Pond. I'd like to suggest that you need to do a lot more than that, a lot more than 500 feet.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to get back to the Taunton River, frankly, in terms of controlling invasive vegetation.
Okay. Just expanding that. Yep.
The Taunton River is not much better, but at least there's more flow there than there is in the Damascus River, and it's an issue that has been it hasn't been receiving enough attention, especially from a financial standpoint, and I know that. Having been involved in the last 30 years in the work that's being done there or not done there.
Yep, yeah, so we, talking about that, kind of trying to come up with that consistent mechanism for dealing with this issue over time.
Yeah, why is 500 feet a magic number?
It's not, it's just that we've been talking, that's kind of the stretch where there's intense, that's the most intense sedimentation. We know that it's easier for invasives to kind of form in mass in these kind of areas that do face sedimentation. It's easier for them to grow, it's just kind of a priority areas. And since it's also the upstream extent, addressing it there first is positive, since you don't have seeds and other issues and flowing, kind of trying to go upstream to downstream in terms of how the water flows through the system and carrying those invasives, address the headwaters, and you hope that then you can start to address the downstream areas without them getting, pinged again from stuff coming from upstream that you just.
Okay, all right. Yeah. I'll let you carry on with your meeting then. But I just want to go on record as having been here to represent Middleborough's interests, and to let you know that that particular element of your planning is not getting enough attention from a financial management standpoint, and needs to be fully funded on an annual basis in order to make sure not only that the fish can get in and out, but that there's some kind of control going on in terms of the revegetation of these invasive plants that are getting in the way of not only the water quality, but the traveling of the fish. And if you want to continue to see them coming and going, we need to manage it. We're not. And I just want to go on record as having told you guys that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's definitely like a consistent theme that has come up kind of from meeting to meeting, and something that we definitely think about in the context of the herring. The project team was out there this past season trying to canoe and kayak, and we saw firsthand how clogged up the Damascus is with that milk oil and other kinds of nuisance plants, and we saw the herring kind of struggling to get past that.
If you can't get a canoe through, imagine how the fish are doing.
Right, it definitely is challenging, and I think it is top of list, and we do have an ongoing kind of specific effort looking at the Damascus River, trying to understand not only getting the vegetation out, but just improving the health of the river comprehensively. So trying to restore flow by decreasing pinch points that form around the river, the crossings of different roadways or the railroad. Or even things like the fact that this river doesn't have much topography. It is really difficult to kind of jumpstart flow, but a different kind of channel configuration, a channel restoration might help in that effort. Or something like removing the Bascule Dam, for example, might gain some topography in helping flow and not have such an impoundment, again, of a vegetated mass behind Wareham Street. So it is definitely top of mind in the plan. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Do you guys think that there's a role for kind of volunteers in this process? I mean, we know that the Middleborough Lakeville Herring Commission is all volunteer. Are there other groups that would get involved, say if in invasive plant detection or kind of monitoring beyond the Herring Commission?
Ellen, can I say something?
Yes.
This is Bren Ladino from the Long Pond Association. Years ago, the Long Pond Association had demonstrations set up to teach people how to successfully remove the weed, not just by pulling it and tearing it apart, but by digging up the roots. So the Long Pond Association would have that when we get started again as one of our things that we could offer, teaching people how to effectively take care of weeds in front of their own property.
Oh, that would be amazing. Did you guys kind of do that on like an annual basis, or was it like a?
Yes, we had that available for giving demonstrations. And then, of course, people who came to those demonstrations hopefully went home and used them. So I think you can get voluntary help, but right now, we really need to have the machinery. Buying it is an excellent idea to help take care of our weed problem.
You know, since this is a regional problem, maybe a regional solution would be more helpful than individual communities trying to come up with the funds to rent equipment to pull these weeds and people to come in and operate them. Maybe if we had a regional group with a regional source of funding, we could do more. And since we would be doing it ourselves on a regional basis, we would have people that were committed to doing it, and we wouldn't have to pay them, at least not pay them as much as we're paying these private sector people who own the equipment. We need to own the equipment and have the people that are willing to volunteer their services to operate it in order to do it right. It's our communities that want this done. It's our communities and our people living in our communities that will do it best. So let's just get a regional effort together to raise the money to get the shared equipment and form a regional group of dedicated people that are going to go out there and do the work.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely kind of consider how, we want the town, you know, there is an existing mechanism for the towns to talk to each other. We don't want to discount the effort of the Assawompset Ponds management team that kind of has, especially is having more and more kind of conversations about this. Then there's the Long Pond Association. So I think this effort is an effort to get everyone on the same page that might lead to a group like that. So I think it's a really it's an exciting idea, and it's something that we want to kind of feed into with the plan. Get everyone on the same page, get everyone pulling in the same direction on a regional basis. And, you know, that's why we're doing this on a watershed scale, not just, you know, one town or another. It definitely needs to be a regional endeavor.
It's not going to succeed unless you provide the funds and you have the dedicated people that are going to do the work themselves. I know I could get you a dozen people right now from Middleborough that will deal with our section of the Damascus River. And I'm sure that Lakeville and Freetown, I spent 6 years as town administrator in Freetown and Westport. So I'm sure that we could find the funds to do it and find the dedicated people to do the work if we had the equipment and the you need the financing to be in place. You need to commit, you need to buy it, you need to then call on the people like myself who are screaming bloody murder that we need to do this on an ongoing regional basis and get it done.
I agree. Bren, can I ask you one question about the monitoring? Something that came up in the steering committee was, you know, so in kind of passing that knowledge on to people about how to do their own weed removal, did you guys like point them in a direction of where to dispose of the weeds? Like we thought there was a thought that people would do more of that, but then it's like, okay, wait, now you pulled the weed. What do you do with them? Like, where do you bring them? Where do you dispose of them? Was that part of your training?
I really don't know the answer to that, but I will look into that.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think Martha. Okay, I think Martha's waiting.
Okay, Martha. Yeah, go ahead. Martha, do you want to have a comment? Yeah.
Well, I just noticed that you had the boat washing station at the top of your list. And
no priority meant to be shown there. It was just the. Yeah.
I get that, but I think when people see lists, they see the things at the top and think that that's the most important thing.
Okay,
I would put the control of the invasives at the top of that list, for sure. And I agree completely with what Jack is saying. And I do think that there is a bond, as we know, for $1 million for water quality issues in Long Pond. That hopefully this study that you're completing will be able to be used as the framework for going after that money. That will be a bit of a long process, and maybe Caitlin can weigh in on that. But I know that the senator is, and also Representative Oral is very interested in going after that money. But that is meant for Long Pond. But I do agree that it needs to be a regional approach, 100%.
yeah, agreed. And I know, so I don't know, Caitlin, if you did want to weigh in.
So to my memory, we had last discussed pursuing earmarks as well. The bond process, I know we talked about this a couple of months ago. It's very extensive. It's not going to be an immediate solution. So senators, the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, we need, again, we need the solitude solution study. We need specific asks. We can't just give out, a random amount. We need kind of a budget that we can follow. So in terms of funding, we'll need some hard numbers, but we can certainly pursue the bond monies. It's not a problem, but I know the senator specifically mentioned that he thinks that an earmark would be a more prudent option, but I can certainly talk to him more when he returns.
Thanks, Caitlin. Pete, I want to thank you for being patient. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. Thanks. First, yeah, absolutely support volunteers and keeping them engaged in this effort, as that will drive the interest of environmental protection exponentially more than anything that we're doing on this call today. Let's see. I think there was something else I wanted to mention. I forgot though. The only other thing is just looking out for one another and everybody on the call. Bren, when you were mentioning removing, teaching folks to remove invasive species, just for liability purposes of your association, please make sure you talk with the Conservation Commission and DEP, because typically that would result in a wetlands violation if that would be completed without a permit. So just looking out for one another there.
Thank you. That's a good point. I will check into that.
But I'm all about it. Education's great, just as long as it's permitted and done the right way. And that said, I do have to jump for another call. So it was great talking with everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Pete. If I could just hop in for one more comment on the volunteer basis. I know when we were clearing the dredging the river recently, there needed to be once again approval from the federal resources, federal authorities, and monitors to make sure that the equipment was being operated correctly. I agree that it would be awesome to have it in-house in town. But from what I understood, you needed to have like somebody trained at monitoring it to make sure that the process was going in a way that didn't harm any endangered species. Just want to throw that out there.
Now, are there qualifications for those licensed people, or is it a matter of getting a piece of paper that says you have a license?
I don't remember the particulars. I just know that the actual process needed to have monitors up and down the river before it was going in. So just something to consider.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it would involve having somebody with that particular qualification or certification on house all the time. That might be extremely costly. So just wanted to throw that out.
Well, yeah, we should find out. I mean, if it's a question of having one individual that's licensed and overseeing the operation, you could have volunteers that are actually doing the work. I would think. You know, it's I would think the regulatory agencies would be only concerned that somebody licensed and knowledgeable about how to do this work without adversely affecting other species was on hand, wouldn't you? I mean, you don't need to have everybody that's involved in the pulling of these weeds have that kind of knowledge, I wouldn't think.
Now, well, for example, for the weed pool that they just did, they had to have like a turtle specialist kind of overseeing. So it kind of is a multiple layers of expertise sometimes that you wouldn't necessarily like jump to immediately, but you know, and that's had to do with the whole the federal permitting system. You know, that was related to endangered species, so they needed that expert, and it just kind of depends on what the situation and the circumstances are.
Helen, is
yeah.
there a place that we could get a copy of the permitting process so we can see what the demands were?
Yeah, I will look into that. Yes.
Yeah, maybe
Thank you.
we could a list of what is required for the different bodies of water in terms of permitting for weed removal. They are probably somewhat different.
Yeah, I would think they'd be different from the ponds to the river, at least, you know, because, you know, nobody's pumping water out of the river for consumption.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I would think that that would be the case. You're right.
Understanding that like permit process is definitely almost feels like most of the battle sometimes. So we hope that we want the management plan to include that kind of information that people can reference and be useful as you guys try to apply for things, especially, you know, if you're forming the nonprofit. We want everyone to kind of understand at least like who you have to be talking to for those different permits. All right, so I'm going to go back to screen share just for, we're almost kind of through the kind of universe of types of recommendations that we're thinking about. The last one here that we want to talk about some specific kinds of different regulations that might affect water quality in a positive way. And the ones that we're going to want to get into specifically have to do with protecting buffers around wetlands and around surface water bodies from runoff. You know, and sometimes it's regulations in terms of regulating certain, you know, no action within 50 feet as an example. You know, it's just an example, but sometimes it'll specify kind of an exact buffer distance. Sometimes it's less regulation and more best practices in terms of establishing no mow lines, especially on municipal lands, where again, kind of to Peter's earlier point, the municipality can serve as an example of kind of what to do on a private, kind of what the best management practices are, even for private landowners. We can talk about fertilizer use and how to best get information out to the public about what appropriate fertilizer use is, so that we don't have a lot of excess nitrogen and phosphorus and running through the groundwater into the ponds and over the surface too. We could think about agricultural best practices, and I think maybe in our region, maybe most importantly, kind of encouraging the use of certain types of septic systems above the Title V base requirements that perform a higher level of nitrogen reduction. So kind of just as we go through those, I don't know if anyone has a buffer on their own property or can speak to this very directly, but sometimes local wetland bylaws, they can and often do restrict activities in a buffer zone. So for example, Rochester's bylaw prohibits activity in a 25-foot no disturb zone around a wetland area. Various kinds of restoration efforts can be undertaken. This is a picture from Riverside Park in New Bedford, and you see they very clearly have this no mow sign posted when you're at the park, it's every kind of few feet almost, where it's clear like this is an area that was restored. It's supposed to look like this. It's a buffer. It's doing its important function. So let's not mow down, any of the plants here. There's also kind of a restoration toolkit published by the SNEP network. So it's kind of like how, in some ways we can encourage buffer protection to help water quality through regulation, particularly wetland bylaw. In other instances, we could do it through education. Kind of what feels right to you guys? Is it both? Is it one or the other more clearly? Do you have a priority between the two?
Helen, it's Brent
Yeah.
again. I've done a lot of research with other ponds throughout the state of Massachusetts, and there are towns that have restrictions on the kind of fertilizers, for instance, that people who abut waterlands can use on their properties. And if individual towns would look into that and make restrictions, that would certainly help.
That's great. Okay, we can look into those ones. There was some controversy about whether you could have a fertilizer regulation, but then kind of in doing some research, I saw that there was one in Tisbury, for example. So I know it seems like they're around, and maybe you just have to frame them in a certain way, like you're saying, like maybe it can't be the whole town, maybe it has to be specifically for abutters, because that's kind of the most sensitive area. But I think it's definitely something we want to look more into. Yeah. Have you guys ever voted in your town on a proposed wetlands bylaw? Was there support? I know that they're kind of, not every town in the region has one. Is it kind of of interest to you all?
It would be of interest to me in Lakeville, if looking into what kinds of restrictions they do have. I mean, I know you can't cut down trees and do certain things within a certain, maybe it's 50 feet or 100 feet of the lake. I live right on the lake. And I do not fertilize my lawn, but that's a major thing in some of the areas on the lake. I would speak to Nancy Yates about that.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of just an extension of what we were kind of talking about. So there's certain types of fertilizer use regulation at the state level, an act relative to the regulation of plant nutrients that regulates fertilizer uses in certain instances. But it does seem like towns might have to be careful in what they regulate at the local level. But there are a lot of resources for homeowners and professionals that are put forward by groups like different extension services. So there's a lot of kind of best management information available. It's getting it to the property owners. I think they can sometimes do the challenge, and also kind of related to what Peter was talking about before, like that cultural change of not that no one can have a lawn, but maybe less lawn alongside a buffer or some kind of more like naturalized area. There's definitely kind of a lot of best practices. Do you guys have you guys ever participated in any kind of group that's focused on educating particularly about fertilizer use? I know we talked about, the Long Pond Association in the past having that workshop about weed pulls, but have you guys participated in any kind of fertilizer conversations locally?
We haven't that I know of, but looking at what you have up on the screen right now, it says under regulations, fertilizer application not allowed within 20/10 feet of waterways, depending on application method, or within 100 feet of water used for drinking water. So that would really include a good part of our water supply. So we ought to look into whether that's being upheld.
Okay,
100 feet of water is used for drinking water supply.
Okay, yeah, is that actually being enforced? Yeah, how is that enforced?
Yeah.
also, for people that are waterfront, depending on how you landscape right down to the water's edge, regardless of what you throw down on your lawn, when you have a hard rain, it's all flowing right into the pond. So I think you need to also educate them on, maybe not mowing everything down right along the water's edge. Or coming up with a list of vegetation that perhaps they can plant to stop erosion and also stop the migration of whatever you're throwing down on your lawn and in your planting beds, from flowing into the pond.
Yes, I think, yeah, like the resources like that, like lists, things that people can really can use immediately and know that it's been vetted by a local organization, the local town, that the conservation commissions
Yep.
have, signed off, and yeah.
I mean, the more research you can do for, the people who actually live on the pond, I think the more successful you'll be, because, people, a lot of people are lazy, they're just gonna plant whatever they want, regardless of whether it's the best variety to be planted there.
Right, yeah. Or, I feel like as a culture, we have these things that we have just learned that are the things to plant, and maybe it's exposing people to new variety, right? And
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, to be honest, I let whatever was growing in the rocks, on my water's edge, I let it grow because it keeps the geese off my lawn. Geese are a major problem on the pond, and if they do get on your property, there's geese poop everywhere, and guess where it goes when it rains hard?
Right.
It's something to consider, the geese are a big problem.
Yeah, and I think the water suppliers have mentioned that before, as kind of in one of their annual reports. I was reading that, yeah, they always mention geese as kind of one of the main issues and impairments they have to deal with. Yeah.
And they might be a big culprit in spreading the invasives also.
The geese themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
They are definitely part of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and so kind of going back to our septic conversation of earlier, I just did want to highlight some of the local denitrifying and kind of enhanced septic bylaws that have been passed. So right now, a lot of the towns surrounding the pond have kind of the basic Title V approach. There's particular regulations that the Board of Health has. It's a little bit above that, and in a couple of the towns, it's the case that a cesspool, for example, needs to be updated at the time of property transfer. So there are some nods to additional levels of enhanced and upgraded systems. But there's also kind of a whole other world that's being pursued by DEP and by a few other communities, specifically these kind of denitrifying septic systems. What these bylaws do is they go above the Title V minimum. Most of the three that I looked at, so we looked at Marion's, Wareham's, and Tisbury's, and they all set this effluent limit for these systems of 19 milligrams per liter or less. That's kind of the standard that I think DEP has published. It can be a town-wide regulation, or it can be in a more kind of defined area. For example, around the APC and the Nemasket. In Marion, it's town-wide because pretty much all their town affects the coast. Whereas in Wareham, they have a specifically defined water quality protection zone that is basically 500 feet out from any surface water body. And that's where these systems are expected to be put in place under certain circumstances. In Tisbury, it's two particular watershed management districts. So kind of, it depends on the scale, but it can be applied at different scales. Some of the bylaws permit variances from the Board of Health, some don't, and some kind of have sunset provisions where they say, you know, you need this kind of system now, but if you're connected to sewer down the line, you know, we can talk about a switch. Or for example, if we find that the level of nitrogen in the water body that we're trying to protect has returned to acceptable levels, then we don't need to require these anymore. So they have different shapes and kind of like permutations, but there are some precedents for these kind of systems. They don't they're never retroactive in the sense of they're not expecting people who have, you know, viable approved Title V kind of conventional systems to do this. It's really for new construction, kind of any increases in design flow. If you kind of knock a house down and you're trying to build a much bigger house and you need therefore a bigger septic system, that might trigger it, or any kind of failed systems that just need to be upgraded, then it's kind of like upgrade them to the standard instead of the conventional standard. So you kind of define the applicable area, define the triggering event, and then decide what kind of technology you want to kind of permit. And a lot of the language in these bylaws is that it's allowing any technology that's approved by DEP on like a provisional pilot or general program use for nitrogen reduction. So I don't know, what are you guys' opinions about an enhanced septic bylaw that kind of targeted addressing some of these as new construction happened or as systems need to be upgraded?
Sounds wise to me.
Yep, I think it sounds good.
My only comment would be is that I know there are rules around septic already in place, and I know at places around the ponds, particularly Clark Shores, I know has a massive community of septic tanks that aren't up to date for year-round use, even though people do live there year-round. So in terms of correcting some of the older septic tanks, it wouldn't necessarily resolve that. And that being said, I'm not sure if those homes obeyed those rules in the first place, if there was anything put in place.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be enforcement for failed systems. And again, it could be a money issue. Replacing a septic system is very costly.
Yeah.
So if a system is failing and nobody's doing anything about it, I would say it's probably a financing issue. So having financing available, or as discussed earlier, or 0% financing would probably be a very important part of that.
Yeah.
Right, it's like, in general, it's like a great idea, but you need to make it accessible to people, right? Like, and just not require something that's gonna put like a heavy burden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those properties in Clark Shores are probably started as camps, you know, what they referred to as a camp. And they've probably been in families for, you know, decades. So, you know, putting a burden of something like that on it. But again, if a septic system isn't up to code, they shouldn't be able to use it year round.
And I think that was the problem, is that they were up to code for partial years.
Seasonal.
But there's a little enforcement to kick people out of their homes for 3 months of the year, as far as I'm aware.
If they're being rented, you know, then the owners aren't there. So, you know, to me, enforcement, you know, needs to have a little teeth to it.
You're 100% right. And that's why I brought up the point in the first place. Because from what I understood, there were rules around what septic tanks were required at the time. But the homes in that particular section of the pond, I know, got by it because they ended up being full year residences just because they were there, you know. So just something to consider, just bringing up the point. But in terms of making bylaws for new septic systems being constructed, that sounds wise to me.
Is this system that you're, that you have up here, is that the one that Coalition of Buzzards Bay is using? Or is there something different?
I can't quite answer that because it seems like there are a few different types of technologies that it's kind of like a new and innovative type of approach, but my guess is what they're using probably would fall in this category. Yeah, I know that they do a lot of water testing and are really concerned about this issue too. So I'm assuming yes, but there might be other options beyond just what they're using for their systems. Yeah. But I think that that's a really good point. Like we can, you know, it's a really good local to our region, at least example, maybe of people who are applying this here, in addition to kind of the Wareham and Westport and other areas that we should look at that example too, for the BBC. Yeah. All right. So any other kind of did we kind of miss any major, we talked through a lot of the kind of sedimentation and invasive water quality issues. Some of these regulatory approaches, some of the public education components that we might want to include around, weed removal, what you can and can't do, or fertilizer, what you kind of shoot, or what your options are. Are there any kind of other major water quality actions that you would want to see pursued, kind of as a kind of before we kind of close this part of the meeting?
I mean, just to hem on that last point, we were talking about reviewing how all of these, either a bylaw or personal yard care, how any of this gets enforced might be, I'm not sure if it kind of fits into all of these sections, but maybe as its own little blurb, enforcement is part of the first step here.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, definitely. Okay, Ben, I think I'm turning it over to you now for kind of the kind of next step.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. That was a really pretty awesome conversation. So this is the second conversation in a series of several other conversations. And as we've talked a lot today, there are like other documents mentioned and different kind of resources that people would be able to access. And thank you all for sharing what you know with us. If you would like to visit our project webpage, I can include the link in the chat, and this is where we are posting the majority of our or all of our project work as we go through it, and where we will be communicating updates regarding the final report and any future workshops. There's also we also have a comment form if you would like to continue sharing any specific comments or general topics, or if you have any feedback about how this session was run, or how communications generally are for the project are hitting the marks, or where we could do better. You can also access that at bit.ly/comment -APC-Nemasket, and I can also include the link here. And finally, we also have the opportunity for you to drop very specific comments and recommendations using our online water quality and floodwater reporter. So Helen, if you wouldn't mind going to the next. Yeah, so this floodwater and water quality reporter is an online interactive map where you can once you open it, once you follow this link, you can navigate to either the floodwater map or the water quality map. They serve different purposes. The floodwater map is for if you would like to share any information on chronic or unique flooding events in your region. And the water quality map is if you want to point out there are invasive species in a certain location and provide additional information about what those species are. Just kind of any information that you feel yeah, thank you, Helen. Thank you for opening this up. There's this little box right here has instructions on how to use the map. And once you click past the box, you can click on either the water quality reporter or the flood reporter. Helen, if you wouldn't mind clicking on the water, oh, actually that's perfect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all you need to do once you open up the map is click on Add Instance. This is the flooding map and will look very similar for the water quality map. And then you just have to fill out the details, the type of flooding. If you want, you're welcome to leave your name and email, but none of that information should be, that's information that's only shared with the project team. It's not going to be posted publicly at this time. But it is a great way for you to share very targeted, specific advice for or feedback to us. Yeah, and if you have any questions about that, I can leave my email in the chat as well. If you have any specific questions about how to use a crowdsourced reporter. Yeah, and with that, we do have several more events upcoming. Yeah, thank you, Helen. The next meeting for the project team is going to be on November 10th at the same time, and it will be hosted both online and in New Bedford. This actually is updated.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. We have been going back and forth about the in-person event. I think it's just too late in the year to hold it outdoors. So I think the Zoom only does still apply for New Bedford water supply meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for letting me know, Helen. Yeah, in that case, the Zoom link for the November meeting and for all subsequent meetings will be the same as the Zoom link today. So if you want to set a reminder in your calendar and just copy and paste the Zoom link from the meeting today, you should be able to access that in the future. And finally, thank you all for bearing with me. Just to make sure, just in case anyone got here in a method that was not from our email listserv, I can include the link to the registration form. If you've seen it already, thank you so much for filling that out. But if you would like to fill that out, you can register for workshops and we will be sending you further information. Yeah. And thank you all so much. It was really wonderful seeing you all and hearing some of the feedback today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate that. And this major plan is the vehicle for having all this input in one spot. And so all your suggestions tonight were really great. Really appreciate it.
I want to personally thank you all for all your efforts.
Thanks. Thank you.
As always, thanks for setting this up, Ellen. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Ben, thanks for participating too. And Eric, thanks guys.
All right.
All right.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
Good night, everyone.